Hi, I'm Alphonso, and welcome to the series, The Indian in Me, where I interview people about their stories and about their identity. So underneath, you're going to see a subscribe button. Please subscribe to this and leave a comment because we would like to hear your stories too. And if you visit our webpage, theindianinme.com, and the link is also in the notes below, please share your story with us as well. So, in this episode, I am so looking forward to interviewing Bernie Morgan. Look, before I start, I just want to give you a thumbnail of Bernie. And this is a thumbnail which could not fit in a thumbnail because it's such an amazing story so far. So, let me just go through it and then we'll get into listening to Bernie talk about some of her stories. So, after being a stay-at-home mum for 14 years, Bernie went to university for the first time and got a master's degree. She wrote the design brief for Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Playground. Goodness me. She was the first CEO of Responsible Finance, which pioneered the development of that whole industry in the UK. She was also an advisor to Her Majesty's Treasury and worked closely with Cabinet Office and a bunch of other government departments. And she's also appeared before 2 select committees. Wow. Had an international role as well, guiding governments and financial policies to support vulnerable people and communities. And she was on the board of NatWest Social and Community Capital. Last year, Bernie published her first book, The Amazing Life of Cecilia Chatterjee, the story of one woman's struggle for her own independence spanning 1876 through to 1947. Here's the thing. Cecilia was Bernie's grandmother. And Bernie spent a couple of years bringing Cecilia's story to life to share around the world. Really highly recommend this book. It is brilliant. But there's more. There's more to Bertie, right? You think that's it. Apart from, doing all those things, she's been a cleaner, a stand-up comic, and I just found out actually appeared a couple of times at the Edinburgh Festival. She's been the owner of a chocolate cafe in Margate. She's been a contestant on 3 national TV quiz shows and won one of them. I'd love to know how much. We'll find out, I guess. And she's currently also a newsreader on her local radio station. And Bernie also has a podcast of interviews with amazing women. And you can access this through Bernie's website, amazingwomeninvisiblelives.com. 3 kids, 5 grandkids, and lives with her partner in Kent. Welcome, Bernie, to The Indian in Me.
Thank you, and thank you for asking me, Andre.
So, first of all, I'm curious to know what did you win in the quiz show?
Well, yeah, on that quiz show that I won, it was £10,000. So It was the jackpot, it's a BBC quiz show, and I think the BBC have a limit on what can be won on one of their quiz shows, and it's £10,000. So I got that, which was great. But I've also been on, and you probably know, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I presume you have that in Australia.
Yes, yeah.
And I got onto that a couple of years ago, and there were 93,000 applicants, and they only wanted 66 people. And I had to go through no end of quizzes and all sorts of barriers or hoops to whatever. And then I was a complete disaster.
How far did you go?
Nowhere, really. I don't know if they do the fastest finger first.
Yeah,
and I didn't get those right. And I was the only one that didn't get them right. And that's probably, I suspect, because my reactions, when you get older, your reactions slow and everybody else was younger. And so they took the mickey out of me for getting everything wrong. So it's always sort of, if I remember I did impossible with the 10 ground, I remember how badly I did on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
That's amazing. And, one day you're going to have to share your stand-up routine with us because
right.
I love stand-up.
Do you?
I do love stand-up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting form of communication because most people wouldn't do it. And so most people say, no, I couldn't get up there. I couldn't do that sort of thing. But if you do it, and I teach people how to do it and I help give them confidence, the buzz you get from it is so good because, as I say, so many people just wouldn't dream of doing it. But the routines generally tend to be about being old and being a woman. And because I worked in political circles for so long, often I do bits of political satire and things like that, you know, depending on what's going on. So most of them are contemporary. So I'd have to rewrite one, Andre, just to show you.
Excellent.
Dear,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
that's going to be on the list, I think. Okay, Bernie, let's jump into it, right? So, and just going through your thumbnail, which is what a colorful life you have led. It just is amazing. So here's the first question. So as you look back on your life, Bernie, you know, what are some of the moments and experience that really stand out for you?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think it depends on which track I'm looking back on, if you see what I mean. Sometimes it's the career. So if I look back on the career, I absolutely loved writing the design brief for the Diana Memorial Playground. We had two big Diana Memorials in this country. One of them was the playground and one of them was a fountain. And the fountain was a disaster. So, you know, if anybody ever says, did you do the fountain? I always have to say, no, it was the playground. But the playground was a blueprint for how playgrounds should be, or municipal playgrounds should be. It was, I felt, really exciting project to do something that was, you know, low maintenance but exciting for kids. So I always look back at that, and I think because it's physical and because you can see it, and because people who say to me sometimes, oh, my kids have played there, they've absolutely loved it, then, you know, that seems to me to be, you know, something I'm really proud of and sticks out. And then, of course, setting up a whole new industry in this country. And I have to say, Andre, coming to Australia to advise the Australian Prime Minister, as I did once, on social enterprise, except it was Kevin Rudd at the time. And well, he didn't turn up, he just sent somebody, but that's fine. I went to your Houses of Parliament and advised your Treasury and your family, the big civil servants in the higher, there's a families department, I think.
Yes. Yep.
And as soon as I got home, I think he changed and moved, it became somebody else, because you had a lot of political upheaval, particularly around that sort of time, I think. But I look back on that, you know, being able to fly around the world and do all those things for somebody from A, who was a housewife, as you say, for so long, and B, you know, who basically came from the wrong side of the tracks. In this country, the class system is very, very entrenched, and to be somebody who's come from, you know, a working class background, to do that, I've often thought, you know, that was just an amazing, you know, experience really for me. And
did he have the decency to actually meet you at some stage, Kevin Rudd?
No, some people that I knew who wanted to bring the same industry into Australia. They flew me into Australia, and I spoke at a conference in Brisbane, and I went to Canberra, as I say, and I came and I presented at various different government departments, and then spoke to Kevin Rudd's special advisor, but never in the end did I meet him. But I imagine he was embroiled in the turmoil that got rid of him not long later, really.
Yeah,
but it was a great experience.
Yeah, there was a lot of whitewater at that time when Kevin Rudd was here. Okay, so one track was the career track. If you look back at things, any other tracks that you want to share? That's totally up to you.
Yeah, no, that's, and then of course, you know, I had 3 children. I subsequently got divorced, so I'd been married a very long time, like 30 years, and then got divorced. I had to sort of decide what I was going to do. The kids were at an age when they were in their 20s, I think, and so I decided I wanted to live by the sea. And I just upped sticks and moved to where I am now, which is a beautiful town called Ramsgate in Kent. And I didn't know anyone. I just moved by myself and just had to sort of start all over again, which actually in some ways was incredibly exciting, because then I didn't have to be a mother and I didn't have to be a career woman. I could just be me, really, and find discover myself again, which, was exciting. But at the time, friends were saying, you're completely mad. What are you doing? But now I've got 5 grandchildren, as you said earlier, and it's just lovely. I just enjoy time with them and just being able to be with them, really. So I think everything, it seemed a bit of turmoil at the time and tricky, but it all worked out, really.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And any other experiences? I mean, the
Yeah,
book,
I
there's
suppose.
there's
Oh yeah,
all
the
sorts of
book.
things.
I forgot about the book. Yeah. So the book was something that was rumbling in my head for a long time, because she was actually my great grandmother, Cecilia Chatterjee. And when I was growing up, all the family were incredibly impressed with her being a lawyer, but nobody seemed to like her. Nobody spoke of her in terms of warmth and affection. But I was always deeply curious as a child, and I always sort of imagined her swishing around in a sari and being terribly sort of important, and could never understand why nobody seemed to like her. And it wasn't till I got older. When you're a child, you don't see things in the wider perspective, do you? So it's only when I got older and had a wider perspective on she must have been a pioneer to have been a lawyer of her day, really, and B, quite often pioneering women because they don't fit into the niche that everyone in society has put for them. They're not very popular, they sort of generally aren't very popular. And so, at the back of my head, I was thinking I'd really love to write her story and to have her legacy remembered for what it was, as opposed to her just being remembered for not being very nice. So then I started to research it, as you say, and I did a lot of research, and I'm very lucky on 2 counts. One is the British Library in London hold all the British and Asia records. There's 9 miles of them, Andre, really.
Whoa.
But they have a lot of the personal records on Find My Past, which is their website. And they were saying, I went to a seminar there, they were saying they hold all of the British and India records, but only 75% exist. So there are always going to be gaps. As it turns out with Cecilia, and you will know, I don't know if you finished the book, but she married 4 times and she had 13 children. All those records I could find. So that was great to be able to find them and date them, etc. And then the other bit of complete luck on my part was I came across a distant cousin, a young woman who, for whatever reason, couldn't get out of the house. I think she had sort of agoraphobia or whatever when she was younger. She's only in her 20s now. And she spent a lot of that time ringing up elderly relatives and interviewing them about life and writing it all down. So she had huge amounts of information on the family that was just not quite, that was better than just the dates. If you only got the dates, you haven't got the colour, really. And she had some of the colour for me, and she worked with me about that. So those 2 bits were great. And then me and my partner, we went to India for 3 weeks to do research. Although, in fairness, I had been before on behalf of the government and also on behalf of RBS, but I hadn't done the sort of touristy thing, really. But the great thing about that was a lot of Cecilia's life took place in what's now Pakistan, because it was India at the time. But the one marriage to where she is related to my great-grandfather, her husband was my great-grandfather, that was in India itself. And in really the Golden Triangle, he's buried very near the Taj Mahal, my great-grandfather. So we went to Agra, obviously visited the Taj Mahal, found Christopher's grave. And it was great. And I could put some of that colour and some of those thoughts into the book, really. And that was very exciting. So to be able to do that was really good.
Fantastic. Okay. So Bernie, we are in this collaboration called The Indian in Me.
Yeah.
What drew you into this collaboration? What captured your imagination about The Indian in Me?
Well, the interesting thing was that, writing the book, it then brought home to me. I mean, I've always obviously known I'm mixed race, always had a sense that of otherness, if you see what I mean, that we never quite fit in with society as it is, the broader society. But actually writing the book really made me think fully a bit more about what it was for my family coming over to England in 1950 in partition, and my grandfather, and bringing my mother over. I know my mother never wanted to come over. And then so that got me thinking more about identity and where some of those Asian traits have affected my life, which I hadn't quite realised. And then obviously wrote the book, and it was Nigel Foote who'd read it and contacted me and asked me. And you know, the great thing for me about it, among other things, is to meet with people who have got a similar background and similar thoughts or similar sort of influences, I suppose. Because even though I'm one of 6, I've got 5 brothers and sisters. None of them, I don't think any of the other 5 have got the interest in what's gone on in our history and our heritage the way that I've always had it, and even more, I've had it since writing the book. So to meet with you and the other guys in the Indian of me, you know, I just think, oh, it's just so nice. It's like being in an oasis of haven of, you know, just like-minded people, really. It's really nice.
Yeah, awesome. So what has, as you've identified, as you were saying, as you've gone back and identified some of those things that have stuck with you, what has stuck with you culturally from your Indian heritage?
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, my mother, as I say, she never wanted to come over. She was at university. She was a bit of a child prodigy, and she was at university in Mumbai studying medicine. And she didn't want to come over. My grandfather, her father, was in what's now Pakistan. He was in a place called Kotri near Karachi, and wrote to her to say, we're going to England. And she wrote back and said, I want to stay, but clearly didn't stay. So she came with the family and never realized her ambitions of becoming a doctor. She ultimately became a teacher. But her big thing was she didn't want to fully acknowledge her Indian background and past, and there's a group of, I think, people who don't. So she really wouldn't be drawn on too much besides how awful the weather was here in England and how terrible the prawns were compared to the prawns that she used to get in India. So I always, for many years, just thought it was my mother sort of, oh God, she hated the weather here, she hated the food, the prawns and the fruit. She always said you got much better mangoes back in India than you did here, but never ever really, I think, sort of drew on much more than that. Always pretended the rest of it didn't really happen. And it's only when I think about it, and I think there's some things about the position of women that my mother totally succumbed to, and my father, who was a bit of a chauvinist, totally sort of agreed with, and I didn't. And I think now a lot of that has come back to the Indian roots that we had, you know, that women shouldn't, I mean, that's generally around the world, in fairness, but there's a lot more, I think, in India about the position of women being subservient to men, which she totally was, and which I didn't agree with, really. So I think there's that. So I often think in my career, I think if my father had been alive, he would have been conflicted by, you know, that the career was actually successful, but it was his daughter's rather than his son. So it's like he would have been, yeah, very conflicted by that one. So I think there's that. But then there's other things like, I don't know if this was happened to you, but my mother was very, very, very stark on the honor of the family. And the honor of the family and the family name and how that appeared externally was huge to her, absolutely huge. And I thought, again, growing up, I thought that was the same with everyone. And it's now I've worked out that actually that is much more of an Indian trait, isn't it, really? That, and, you know, because other people I've talked to, my friends, I say, well, did your parents say this? You know, the family honor was, you know, over and above everything else. And they say, well, no. So I think there's that. I mean, again, it's not something I've necessarily carried forward, but it's something that was a big influence, at least on my mother when we were young, really. But for me, if I think of things I've carried forward, I would say it's there are sort of some things like it's a love of life. I think the Indians have a real love of life, and, you know, an out there-ness, which again wasn't particularly approved of in my house. It's like, but, you know, they like to be out, they like to do things, they love colourful colours, and I love all of that sort of thing, which in England is deemed to be extremely odd, really. And I think it's, you know, and I think they have a love of people and an interest in people, you know, so I think some of those traits have come down, really.
Fantastic. Okay. So how do you, to this day, go about retaining some of the Indianness in you? What sort of things do you do, Bernie? Just to...
Well, Well, yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I do actively do very much, really, but the book has made a difference in that respect. I mean, one of the things, as I say, is I wanted Cecilia's voice to be heard, and I wanted my grandchildren and their grandchildren to know her legacy, really. And so that is, hopefully the book will be passed down through the generations, and they'll get that they had this very amazing ancestor. But in terms of sort of keeping the legacy up, I do very little, I suppose, really. But I do cook. I mean, I do proper cooking. I get very snotty about, wrong curries and people thinking a curry is just something with a bit of chili in it. And I just don't approve of that sort of thing. But yeah, no, I'm not sure I do anything active, but it's made me think perhaps I should,
Fantastic. So you mentioned earlier about, your mum and dad and some of the sorts of, playing within the train track, so to speak.
Yeah.
So as you kind of look back on your childhood, what were some of the, one or two of the biggest or most important challenges that you faced as a child growing up that kind of reflects in you today, you think?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of, I mean, I was one of 6, as I say, and we were born within 8.5 years, which means my poor mother would have been just pregnant constantly for 8-9 years, really. And there's very little space between any of us, and we were brought up in what we have as social housing, a council estate, where inevitably the house was too small. So there was a lot of roughy-tufty experience. I had 2 older brothers. And one of the reasons I love boxing now, boxing is something I took up in my 50s, Andre, a bit late, really.
What?
But
That's not on your thumbnail.
I probably left that off. But my brother, they were fighters, my brothers. I think all big brothers are, really.
Yeah.
But for goodness sake, and I really used to have to stick up for myself, and I used to get into the fights. I can remember the fights so well. And then I wanted to learn how to do it properly. I wanted to learn to box, but my father, of course, didn't approve of girls boxing. Although in the end, he gave me a couple of lessons out of desperation to shut me up, I think. And then in the end, say I did take it up properly and have proper lessons in my 50s. So, but so it was sticking up for myself. And I realize now that sticking up for myself was something I learned very, very young. And I still do it, although, I only sort of pick and choose when I do it, really. But being able to sort of, stand my ground is something that I learned very young, probably by accident, or at least, it was difficult, but what do you do, really? So I think there was that, but somehow even during when I was at school, I was tended to be picked out to do leadership roles from a very young age. I was like top of the form or head girl or something. I don't know what they call these things, top of the class type leader type person that the teachers would often ask me to do and things. I don't quite know why, but they clearly saw something in me. But that gave me, again, opportunities to sort of, just to sort of show a bit of leadership, I suppose, really very young. So it brought that up. But for me, the main thing was sticking up for myself.
Boxing. Wow, that's
I love a good uppercut.
So, you've written a great book, amazing
Thank
book,
you.
which is a fantastic, as you said, a legacy to leave your children, your grandchildren, and their kids, because it's something they can come back to, and it's such a historical thing. I mean, I wish I had, a legacy like that to hang on to, and so I think it's great. Apart from the book, which is a big one, I got to admit, what other legacies do you want to leave for future generations?
Yeah, I think to me, it's again about resilience. One of the things that I was very inspired with Cecilia's story was her resilience, that she we're not going to do any spoiler alerts, but she, had a lot of barriers to overcome during her life and achieve what she did. And I think resilience is probably one of the most important characteristics that people can have. And I'd love to be able to think that, I look at my grandchildren and I'm hoping, and they're all very little, the eldest is 10 and the youngest is a baby, so he's not quite 1. But I'm thinking that, I'd love them to have that resilience and that fortitude and that ability to pick yourself up and keep going, because, you know, there's something that nobody ever teaches you, I suppose, and perhaps you can teach it, I don't know. But, you know, it seems to be one of the most important life skills. And, uh, you know, it would be great to think that they've all got that, because life will batter them.
as we
battered it all.
as we're experiencing now, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if there's ever a time we need resilience, it's in the last couple of years. Yeah, it's
yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely.
So Bernie, as I kind of listen to you, it just keeps hitting me that, you know, you've been very achievement focused. You know, you've done amazing things with your career, amazing things with your personal life, amazing things. So as you kind of look ahead from here, what's on your bucket list? What are some of the things you still want to achieve?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Yeah, that's do you know what? Although I sort of feel I have done those things, things have happened. I've taken opportunities, I suppose, and what I've also done is tried to make those opportunities work for me. But I haven't had any grand plan. I've not been very good at grand planning over anything. There's a Jewish phrase, isn't there, that says, you know, if you make plans, God laughs. And I think there's something to do with that. But, you know, there's one thing I'd love to go and see the fjords in Norway, which I've singularly failed to do. And I'd love to, yes, traveling, everyone says travels more, but I want to be around to be with my grandchildren as well, because I think the generation I am, and I'm 63 and I'll be 64 later this year, the relationships we had with our grandparents were very remote, and I don't know if that's a normal thing, but you know, you respected your grandparents and you sort of didn't say anything, and it was be seen and not heard and all of that. Whereas I want to be sort of, you know, in there with them. I'm teaching them boxing. They're going to have some boxing lessons. My granddaughters in August, they bought a boxing bag, and I'm going to teach them some of the moves. So I want to be, yes, just spend a lot more time with them and perhaps travel. But again, if opportunities come up, then I'll take them.
Fantastic. I'm sure they will too, Bernie, because you seem to attract them, right? I'm sure something's going to happen for sure. So if there was some Bernie wisdom that you want to pass on to anyone watching, you know, resilience is a good trait to have, but if there's some wisdom that you've picked up in all of your rich experience that you would like to pass on to anyone listening, you know, one or two things, what would that be?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, so that's another good question. You've got some good questions, Andre. One of the things I would say is to not blame people. You know, I mean, things happen, and often it's other people's faults. But I think you have to understand your own responsibility in certain situations and not carry the baggage, because it's carrying the baggage that pulls you down. Equally, I think you need to learn from it. So it's not a case of forget that, let's all move on. It's a case of what can we learn from what happened and move on, so it doesn't drag us back, really. I think so many people I see, and the women I've interviewed for my podcast all have a very similar attitude, you know, that this has happened, it's dreadful. Let's see where I can go once I've learned from it, as opposed to, as I say, blame everybody and stay in the same space blaming everyone, or equally just ignoring it and carrying on as if it didn't happen. So it's that level of self-understanding and responsibility, I think.
Yeah, I love what you said there. So it's similar. We're at the same vintage. I'm 64. So
oh right, okay.
and you know, when you're talking about not blaming and the sorts of things, I often talk about, you know, stay curious a little bit longer, because you know we're so quick to judge, and we're in this clickbait kind of world right now, and everything is instant. TikTok, 30 seconds. You know, the ability to stay curious is it's what you said. It's what you said. It's just my rephrasing of it.
Yeah, but that's much better. Hold on.
Okay, Bernie, last question. And the last question is really up to you. The last question is, what is the one question I should have asked but didn't?
Oh, no, that's another good one. I don't know. I've just been very impressed with your questions, Andre. I thought they're really good, and I hadn't really sort of thought of it like that. What you've asked has given me food for thought, actually, to think about what to do next and how to do things and what my Asian heritage is. But no, I can't think of anything. So, well done.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, let's hold it there. So let's close it off. Fantastic, Bernie. I've learned so much. I mean, I don't know. We've been talking a lot, and isn't it interesting when you go through life? where you meet people and you talk about things, but you don't actually talk
Yes.
about things of any gravity. And
No,
we've spoken about stuff out there, but just
yeah.
talking to you and preparing for this interview, it's like, what? Who is this person? Who is this person, Bernie? It's we often talk to. I know some people. I call them Mr. 10%, because I've known him for 30 years. I only know about 10%, because there's,
Yeah,
but we
that's what happens.
and it does happen, isn't it? So I really
Yeah, it
value and
does.
appreciate
Yeah.
the half an hour or
Oh,
so we
thank you.
spent together.
Yeah.
So let me
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was saying I have too, and it's people don't tell their stories, do they? Often enough. So as you say, because we don't hear them, but it's just been great. It's really good, and I feel I know you better. Not that they gave you a word in edgeways, obviously, but but it's great. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Bernie. So just to wrap it up, thank you again, and thanks for watching, everyone. So once again, please click on the subscribe button and leave a comment. We would love to hear your stories as well.
Yeah.
So please share them on our webpage, theindianinme.com. That's one word, theindianinme.com. The link is below. And I will have some more interviews to share, and I hope you can join us again. So I'm Andre Alphonso, and thanks for watching this interview series, The Indian in Me. See you next time. Good night, Bernie.
Good night. Thank you for asking. Bye.